Hey guys, welcome back to Hear Our Voices. This is your host, K Did. We are here to tell stories, give resources, and change the narrative of homelessness. So, this is part two with Caitlin and her telling you the information that you need if you are unhoused or in shelter. And I want to explain the two, depending, I think, depends who it is and what part of academia or just life in shelter. But for New York City, they say unhoused is like people on the like street homeless, and people in shelters like that they said homeless. It's very weird. I don't know, but that's what they say. That's what I kind of go with. I personally do not go with the name unhoused. I feel like that's just a pretty way of saying the person's homeless. But tell me down below or tell me on TikTok, what do you actually prefer? Do you, or which one do you think is better? Homeless or shelter or unhoused? So people also use unhoused a lot too in this work. So yeah, which one do you think is better? But also sit back and relax and enjoy this next episode. Thank you.
So largely and I could fall down the rabbit hole of telling you all about my model, and I would absolutely love to, and maybe we could do that another time. But as it was designed to take and that's the benefit of me having been a provider who did this work for so long. I know where there are opportunities to inject this into the dialogue, into pre-existing dialogue, and how do we make sure that we aren't putting extra burden, but instead using collaboratively the interventions that exist. So another example is, community meetings that happen depending on the location, the shelter, things of this nature. It could be, these could be weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, bi-monthly, who knows? But these existing community spaces where people come together to discuss various things that impact the building and all of those who reside within it. And how are we using that as a platform? That is one of the things. And what stakeholders are involved at that point. And something else that I do remember earlier, the part two of your question. So if you don't mind, I was going to jump back. And what you had said is part two, why should this be important or of value if somebody is just going to move, right? They might move from the shelter, hopefully, God willing, universe willing, whatever your persuasion is willing, that people are not residing in shelter for any longer than they absolutely have to, right? And so the assumption being that not everybody who registers to vote there and even votes there will live there long enough to reap the benefits of whatever that elected does end up prioritizing.
Right.
And what I say to people in that group is to try to zoom out to think about a community perspective and about the challenges that are common to not just the unhoused population, but to everyone in New York City who is housing insecure or at risk. So I will tell you, as we know, shelters in New York City are overrun. The census of of beds and shelters every night in New York City there is a surplus every single night. I can tell you that. And so all that to say, if it's not you in that bed who needs that help and who needs electeds fighting for you, who needs electeds allocating resources for you and for your district, so you don't walk out of the shelter and see traffic lights that don't work, street signs that are hanging by one nail, trash and drug paraphernalia in the gutter while you're trying to walk your kid to the bus stop or something like that. If you don't want that for you while you're in that bed, once you are able to get permanent housing and get out of that bed, guess what? It will be a matter of moments before another person is in that bed and needs those resources and supports and representation just as much as you did in that moment. And so I say, yes, we are thinking about ourselves, our circumstances, our needs, and who we want to represent us as individuals, but we also are thinking about what brings the community to the adversity that we experience together as a bigger, broader community, and how are we looking out for each other? The person who comes who's next to reside in your unit, who's next to lay their head on your bed, and understand how are we able to be a part of a broader coalition and solution so that there are eventually, hopefully, less people that are standing in line to get that bed, to get that unit. And so that is what I say when it comes to what if it wasn't, what if it's no longer relevant to me? And then I say as well, I say civic engagement, regardless of your housing status, is an ongoing necessity when it comes to empowering and making sure that your voice is relevant and heard in who represents you and who fights for you. And so even if you can only vote in one election, that's a win. Even if you register to vote and there isn't an election before you end up leaving that shelter, the sheer fact that you're accounted for in registration and how many people are interested from that district, from that shelter, how many people are interested in having their needs considered, that matters. It all matters and it adds up. And that's what I want people to understand. And that's what I want to communicate, is that you matter and you're not just a number. You represent a big, broad coalition, and you represent yourself, your family, your needs, and your power. So
I want to say, before you was even saying the certain thing about, there's a lot of different things that you said, right? So in my
I'm
mind,
sorry, I go off in a bunch of different directions,
no, I
Kaden.
do
I'm
the
sorry
same
about that.
thing. So I was thinking before, but I didn't get to say, is that on this podcast in general, we talk about before you go to shelter, in shelter, and then after you go to shelter. A lot of the people we do talk to are people who are out of shelter, and I'm so happy for them, of course. And I also want to say, for the caseworkers you are seeing, we thank you for your work. I know people might come to you with attitudes, but they're going through a lot. I'm telling you, they're going through a lot, and sometimes they bring the frustration out on you, and they just want better for themselves, and they don't know what else to do or how to do the emotions. Yes, we're adults, but we're basically big kids when it comes to the shelter, and we're just trying to make it. But with the voting and people in general, I'm thinking first in the beginning, when a lot of people are one paycheck away from being homeless yourself. You are one flood away from being homeless yourself. You are one fire from being homeless yourself. You can become homeless at any point in your life, unless you're rich. If you're Bill Gates, you can't go. Well, I'm not saying he can't, but he has enough resources that if his house burned down, I'm not saying I want that to happen. If something happens to his home, he have a couple more that he can just go to. Most average people in the world do not have that kind of resource. So you got to think about, if something happened to me right now, or another thing too, a lot of people in New York City are doubled up, so technically you're considered homeless without being homeless. So think about that. If something happened to me right now, the laws we have in place right now, would that be able to help me or harm me? So whoever you put in those particular fields, whatever they put in place or laws, granted a whole bunch of steps to get to certain laws and things to happening, are they going to be for what is going on right now while I'm low income? Or are they only going to be for people who are rich, or certain brackets or demographics that you are? Because we don't want to say it, but we are in different classes, and people are in rich and middle and lower income, and you're poor and poor and poverty, basically the same thing, right? But you got to think about, is this candidate going to help me and my family? Is it going to help your grandma? Because it might not be you. You might be okay, but remember the grandma you're going to have to take care of when they get old and can't take care of themselves. So technically your income is going to go down because you're taking care of grandma, mommy, all these things. Think about, is that person's policies going to be able to help the people in your family or yourself? God forbid something happens to you. God forbid you get a disability and can't pay rent anymore because you can't go to work, because you don't have a job that gives you proper, leave to get yourself better if you can get better. Think about
Right.
what those people actually stand for. Is that, I think we're just thinking about only homelessness, but a lot of things intersect into different things. One thing can affect the other, and you're like, oh my God, I'm good one day. You're a construction worker. I'm making so much great money. I'm in, if you're not in a union, if you're in a union, it's a little bit different. I'm not in a
Right.
union. You break a leg, you break an arm, you can't pay rent. Your kids go to school, they can't get food, so ACS take your kids away, and then you can't pay for your rent, so you're homeless. Like, these are
And
so
it's
much
this
things.
whole domino effect of this
Yes,
compound, complex, trauma, and you're in this tangled web of
yes.
just struggle and adversity and oppression. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you,
No,
but I
you're
was just
perfectly
like,
fine.
yes.
Yeah. It's just, it's like you said, it's a web. And a web, you can't just get out. Well, I think a spider web, I thought you can't get out at all. But like, you can't get out of this thing. You have to really need different things and to help you. And if the candidates that you're voting for does not
Granted, nobody's perfect, so they might not go for everything you're going for, but if they're at
Right.
least 95% to 90% of what you believe in, I say vote for that person. Because at any
Right.
point in your life, you can be affected. At any point in your life, your neighbor could be affected, your coworker could be affected, your grandma could be affected. Somebody could be affected by the laws they put in and can do something for that. So that's what I think about. I don't just think about, oh, only homeless people. And that's important because, that's the people I represent, the person I was. And I hope to never
Hmm.
be that because, it's usually an ongoing cycle. And I think the cycle should stop at
Absolutely.
me at this point for my family.
Yeah.
But we got to think about how is this affecting most people in there say a low income. So you know their version of low income and our actually version of low income is different. But a lot of people are low income, and as I
Right.
said before, going check to check. So we got to think about what can happen to you when you go to shelter, and then after you leave shelter, what can happen to you then? Because a lot of people in shelter leave
Right.
with these FEPs, city FEPs, well, city FEPs, FEPs if you're DV, it'll be DV, FEPs B, kind of vouchers, or you can live with soda, live out of the state. But what can that person do, and how can their laws also affect your city FEPs? How can it,
Right.
like, these things all intertwine, and it can be with you forever.
Absolutely.
And think about how these things go, because when one politician goes in, and the next 4 years they come out, or two, depends what. I think different ones have different time frames. I'm thinking right now in the mayor in my mind, because that's 4 years, and I think the city council probably is 2 years. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I'm not a politician, as you can see. Um, those things intertwine with each other. So you might say, "Oh my gosh, we have them for the first 4 years. They didn't do great," and then whatever they did is going to downfall and snowball into something else. It's going to take a while for that next person to clean it up, and they might not even have time to clean up that particular thing. So be careful of who you vote for and what they stand for. So yes.
Absolutely. And to your point as well, I love that you brought up the vouchers and city maps and things like this, because this is exactly what I'm talking about. Do we have representatives of our communities where shelters are, where there's high levels of folks that are unsheltered homeless, that are living in parks on the street? Are the people representing those districts, are they fighting for more vouchers, for a greater accessibility to those vouchers, to the timeline of those vouchers being sped up,
Right.
to, and these are the things. Is this something that is even on this person's mind?
Right.
Is the elected, are the elected officials even aware of what a city FEPS voucher is? These are
Exactly.
the kinds of things. And and I wanted to say as well, when you were talking about privilege and the powerful and Bill Gates, that is a big part of why I do this work in the first place, is because, and why I'm passionate about it. The US takes pride in its free and fair elections, but
Right.
it remains unequal and biased in favor of the privilege.
Right.
There's very little data on this, but 60% of people experiencing homelessness in the country are eligible to vote.
Right.
But there's a vote there, the registration rate, if I'm not mistaken, as of the last time that this data was collected by the National Alliance to End Homelessness, what there was, I think, only a third of folks, although 60%
Mm.
are eligible, a third of folks were registered, and only 10% of that
Oh wow.
of that portion execute on the vote, meaning they actually vote. Meaning, at the end of the day, this ends up being a small handful of votes that is not necessarily a force to be reckoned with,
Right.
that an elected might change their perspective because they say, unless I make X, Y, and Z more of a priority,
Right.
I'm not going to win because I'm not going to have the vote of those that are of the unhoused community, what have you.
Right.
And when we talk about that, why is that, and why aren't we talking about it as a broader society? Why aren't we talking about it as advocates?
Right.
And why I believe that to be is, there's a couple of different rationales for this. A generous rationale, right? Like a more benign rationale for this is that the vote of the unhoused population is just viewed as inconsequential. It doesn't, whether we empower people to vote, it doesn't really make a difference either way. That's
Right.
one, piece of mentality from the powers that be. Another is that the lack of participation is simply overlooked. Like, no one's even noticing those, and I mean this in terms of those that hold institutional power when it comes to the political system and the voting systems.
Right.
That's another more generous, like, these are generous assumptions, like, oh, either people like, it doesn't matter either way, it's not worth our energy, Or the other side is, it's not, people aren't even talking about it. People aren't even noticing, right? And then a less generous assumption is that this phenomenon serves to preserve power for the privileged, for the wealthy, for those that exist in power, for those that have higher incomes, employment, more education, all of these things. And if the unhoused population is not a force to be reckoned with, then that power remains concentrated among those with the power and privilege. And then it's a non-starter. It's a non-issue that the unhoused population doesn't vote. And then no one has to meet our needs because we don't vote anyway. We're not a part of the voting base that they need to get their position. So
Right.
why meet our needs? Why care about what we have to say? Why try to empower us and encourage people to register to vote and to vote? Because if they do, then they have to show up for us. And I don't know that everyone wants to do that. And I talk about that as, that's a cynical understanding of power and privilege in political systems, but I think that there's some validity to it and listeners can decide for themselves. But this is why I've devoted my career in this work to empowering this vote. And I always call my work civic empowerment, not civic engagement, because it's not just about touching once or twice each voter, each constituent, each person that's experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. But it's not just about giving them the information, passing them a flyer or something. It's about explaining to them why it's important that their voice is heard, why it's important that they come to the conversation, and how to circle back to what we talked about in the beginning of why this should be a priority. I always say to people that are unhoused, and I talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I talk about this work as a chicken or the egg situation. For those who don't know that expression, it's what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Right.
Now I have people philosophically probably all thinking about it. But I say with this issue, the needs of this population will not be met until we have elected officials in place that prioritize the needs of the unhoused. But we will never have people in power who prioritize the needs of the unhoused until we vote them in and vote people who don't have our priorities I don't have our priorities in mind out. So it's a really tricky and unfortunate thing for a population and individuals who are going through so much layered adversity, so much struggle. For so many people, this moment where they find themselves unsheltered might be the most difficult moment of their life, arguably, for many people.
Right.
And we're trying to ask you to prioritize something like voting. But we are asking more of the system than we are of the individuals. The system needs to bring the tools and access and resources to people to empower people. And then people need to execute on that and take the baton and take it from there so that we can eventually create a world where the unhoused population is a force to be reckoned with. And if you want to hold elected office in New York City, you better have some good answers to what you're going to do about housing and homelessness. Otherwise, you're not winning your election. That's my dream. That's my dream.
It makes sense, especially right now in the crisis that we have. Honestly, let's be honest, this crisis was happening way before Corona. I think Corona just kind of put a highlight on it more, and then other things kind of downfall from that position, and then that happened and this happened, and now here we are. And we can do better. I don't know, people might have to just leave New York. Not might, at this point we gotta leave New York because building up, I don't know. But right now we just have to get landlords who actually want to take these vouchers, because the people have vouchers in their hands and they can't actually get the help, the housing they need, because landlords are discriminating against them and things like that. So we have a long way to go. Not saying that things didn't change, but we have a long way to go. The system is broken, and we just need somebody in place who's gonna do it. And we have to have people who are in other smaller places to do it, because it's not just one person doing these things. There's a whole team, as before said, a community who is pushing this thing along, and we don't have everybody in their particular place actually working towards this particular goal. We're not going to prosper. There's no way it's going to happen if so that's just how it is. But guys, thank you for coming to hear our voices. Thank you for listening to us. This is a place, as you know, we tell stories and we give resources and we change the narrative of homelessness. And we want to make sure that anything that we do is for the betterment of the people of New York City. And honestly, the US at this moment, as like I said before, it's not that big to do everywhere in the world, but I'm staying in my small part of land in this hemisphere, right? And to be able to make a difference. And I hope that the work I do makes a difference. I hope that it can help somebody. I hope that you can learn something, because some people probably thought in their mind, I don't have a home, so I can't vote, and thinking these things. And hopefully you know today that when you listen to this podcast, whoever hear this, no matter what year you hear this in, because yes, we're in 2024, but this in 10 years from now, it should still be the same rule. So whether you have a house or no house, street, long you have an ID, because you're gonna need that to kind of go to the polls and stuff. What I remember when the last time I did vote, long you have everything together and you have a place to say, this is my district and this is where I am, and they could find your proper polling place, you should be fine to vote and be able to vote for the person that you want to. Don't just vote because somebody looks a certain way. Don't just vote because, oh, that name sounds awesome. Vote knowing what they actually stand for. Whatever you believe in, make sure they go in that direction that you want to believe in. Have a person that represent you properly. It's like when you're a parent and you have a child, you want your child's basically a representation of you. I tell my daughter all the time, if you look crazy outside, I'll look crazy outside, even though I'm not the person doing these things. Because you're my daughter, I look crazy. So make sure whoever's representing you, make sure they don't make you look crazy because you voted for them. Make sure this person really, like I said again, nobody's perfect and nobody's gonna agree with everything you do 100% of the time. But if they have most of your values or your beliefs or what you believe in should be happening, if you think all the dolphins in the world should be saving, they're like, I believe in dolphins' rights, and that's for you, then go for that person. That's what matters. So I'm not pushing you to go left, right, up, down. I'm just saying, get the person who is the best for you and your family. Okay. So thank you guys.
1000%. Can I just plug a couple of quick things for
Yes,
listeners?
for sure.
The first is, if you want to check your voter registration status, if you want to check where you're registered to vote, if you're registered to vote, if you want to register, you can go to vote.nyc.com, and then that is where you can check your registration status, register if you would like to, etc. And then a couple of other things just to highlight. The National Alliance to End Homelessness has a great campaign called Everyone Votes. So I'm talking to you, providers. They have a couple of really great voter toolkits of how can you support your community, the folks that are your residents in your building, or the folks that you are working with in street outreach. They have a couple of great one-pagers that are very simple. It's not overwhelming, I promise, about how to execute on this in the immediate and effective ways. And then the other place I'll highlight as well is the NLIHC, the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They have a campaign called Our Homes, Our Votes that is also absolutely wonderful. So many fabulous resources. And it is a national program where you can hear about places all over the country that are doing this work successfully, and then learn from that and think about how can this be replicated? How can it be applicable to your setting? And then finally, just if you would like to learn any more about my work, or if you'd like to connect with me, please feel free to